Hello, in this first video on complex numbers, we're going to talk about what are complex numbers and where do they come from. In order to really establish this, we have to talk about types of numbers. So the most familiar type of number that we know is whole numbers. So whole numbers are numbers like 3 and 5 or 7. These are numbers that describe whole amounts of objects. We can also talk about the natural numbers. The natural numbers are those that naturally occur. So we might have nothing of something, we might have one of it, we might have two of it, and so on. These naturally get extended into what we call the integers. Integers are numbers that are like natural numbers, but we also allow for negatives. So like -2, -1, 0, 1, 2, and so on, all the way to positive or negative infinity. The next type of number are the rational numbers. Rational numbers come from the word ratio because they can be expressed as a ratio of one number to another. So like 1/2 or 3/5 or 102 over 103. These are all examples of rational numbers. Once we have rational numbers though, we're really close to the end of our list, because we also have irrational numbers. So irrational numbers are numbers that cannot be expressed as a ratio. So numbers like pi, which is approximately equal to 3.14 and then continues forever, or the square root of 2, which is about equal to 1.414 and then it goes on forever. So these are examples of irrational numbers. There are no two numbers that we can express these as a fraction. So all of these numbers that we've spoken about are what we call real numbers. They're numbers that we can find on a ruler. They are measurable, they are quantifiable. But there are numbers that exist outside of this. So let's look at the square root of -1. We've been told all our lives that this is undefined. Because we know if we take any real number, such as the number a, and square it, we always get a positive number. So there's no real number for which this is true. But if we get rid of the condition that the number has to be real, we can define a new type of number. This is an imaginary number. So imaginary numbers allow us to say the square root of a negative is equal to I. I stands for imaginary, because imaginary is not real. So these not real numbers allow us to extend to things that in the real numbers are undefined. For example, the square root of -4 is equal to the square root of 4 times the square root of -1. Because if we recall, if we have a product m times n under the square root sign, we can split that apart and have a square root of two different factors. And so we know the square root of 4 is 2, and the square root of I, we've said, the square root of -1, we've said is I, so we now have 2i. So this allows us to extend our numbers. So imaginary numbers and complex numbers, they're not quite the same. So imaginary numbers just have an I in it, but a complex number is usually written in the form a plus b times I, where a and b are two real numbers. A is called the real part, and b times I is called the imaginary part. And so this complex number isn't called complex because it's more difficult than other types of numbers. It's called complex because it has different parts. It has a real part and an imaginary part. And so we could come up with complex numbers in any type of shape or size. So we might have 12 minus 13i, or we could have 1 plus 5i, but they always have both a real part and an imaginary part. And these are what we call the complex numbers.